Greetings, everyone. My name is Jonathan Bailey, and I am from plagiarismtoday.com. Happy day after Election Day, everyone. I hope that you are recovering from what was likely a late night for many of you in the United States, and that no matter which candidate you voted for, or whether your candidate won or lost, that you're taking solace in the fact that the election seems at this time to have been fairly decisive, and you went to bed last night knowing who had won the election. I say that because of something that happened in New Orleans last night, and this is very, very bizarre. But there was an election of great local importance, especially to me, which we don't have a result on effectively, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it today. And specifically, the election I'm talking about is the renewal of the Crescent City connection tolls in the city. Now, I'm going to first off say that I was against the tolls. I say that not because I'm going to try to convince anyone of my opinion. This isn't really like a editorial on the tolls. I saved my editorializing for people here in the city, the people who could vote, but rather to talk about the incident itself, and I want to do this without bias, but I know that my political bias inevitably will seep in, so I'm presenting my side as just a means for you to do your own filtering. But to get a little background on this, the Crescent City connection is a twin-span bridge that connects the west bank of New Orleans with the east bank of the city. 30 plus years ago, they actually added that second span, and when they did it, they instituted tolls on it as a means to pay for the loan they took out to build the bridge. People tolerated that pretty well. However, the tolls were implemented in a pretty unusual way. Most bridge tolls work both ways. No matter which way on the bridge you go, you get a toll. Crescent City Connection toll was one way only, specifically crossing from the west bank of the city to the east bank. And that meant people who live on the west bank, whether you're in the west bank side of Orleans Parish, known as Algiers, such as me, whether you live in western Jefferson or Plaquemines Parish, you were impacted by that toll much, much more than people on the east bank who didn't have to cross that bridge that direction nearly as much. So the result of it was that people on the west bank side of the river, though they made 20% of the electorate, paid something like 80% of the toll. Now, like I said, we were promised 30 years ago that when the bridge was paid for, the toll would be removed. Well, that time is effectively now. By the end of this year, the loan on the bridge will be paid for with interest, and there was a referendum about do we A, get rid of the tolls as originally designed, or B, continue them and continue collecting that money, that $22 million per year in revenue, and use it as a source, theoretically, to keep paying for maintenance, upkeep, and other material on the bridge. Now, there were a lot of arguments pro and con. On the con side, people like me who wanted to remove the tolls, I'll just recap the arguments very, very quickly. They felt that it was an unfair toll for the reasons I just mentioned, but also that the money in it had been horribly mismanaged. A lot of things that were promised to be done were not done. There were ridiculous things like insanely expensive renovations of the offices that managed the bridge, allegations that money from the bridge went to other projects elsewhere in the state and didn't actually go to help and the people who were paying the toll right here in New Orleans. So there were a lot of issues with it. But the people on the pro side of it felt that that money was necessary, that there needs to be a stable source of revenue to maintain the bridge. And I disagree with that because there are 11 other spans on in this state that cross the Mississippi River. None of them have tolls. All of them are maintained by the state just fine. But I don't see why this one is the exception to the rule. But still, it was a very contentious issue, and specifically, Jefferson Parish, both East and West Bank, were against the toll very strongly. Plaquemines Parish, obviously, very strongly against the toll, and the West Bank side of Orleans Parish, Algiers, also against the toll. But the East Bank side was largely in favor. They leaned in favor of the toll, and that was because, A, it was $22 million per year if they didn't have to collect other ways, and B, a lot of the money actually went to improve things on the East Bank side of the river. So a lot of that money ended up over there. Well, it came down to the vote, and as of this morning, we have no idea who won. The election is literally too close to call. The last numbers that were available were that out of over 300,000 votes cast, the difference was a vote of 8, with yes renewing the tolls for 20 years winning. Now, there's a lot that's weird here. And one of the strangest things about it is that Jefferson Parish and Plaquemines Parish both posted their early voter results right as the polls closed. Polls closed, boom, early voter results were out. And that, frankly, made a lot of sense. That's the way most counties and parishes do it. Orleans did not actually post their early voting totals until well after 1 a.m. last night. In fact, I stayed up trying to wait for them to come in. And supposedly, other votes that had to be counted by hand were not even done counting until past 3 a.m. Now, this has led to some allegations of election rigging, and that's backed up by, well, shall we just say, a checkered history of elections in this city. Though New Orleans has never had a major impact on national elections due to the Electoral College, there have been many, many allegations of stolen elections locally here in the city throughout history, and many are already calling this a stolen election. And I don't necessarily believe that's the case, but local media isn't helping. Right now, you visit the Times-Picayune site, you visit the local television stations, the local radio stations, even the weekly newspapers, you're getting different answers. And in fact, the only confirmation we have of that 8-vote tally I just told you was a tweet from an editor at the Gambit Weekly, one of the weekly free newspapers here in the city. And what I think more than anything about this election, win or lose on the tolls, I mean, obviously we're going to be facing recounts and lawsuits and probably a debacle that's going to go way past when the tolls expire December 31st. But no matter who actually wins the election, this really hones me in on the importance of social media and on the importance of local media such as blogging. I mean, the reality of it is, why is the only confirmation we have of these numbers a tweet from the editor of a weekly newspaper? I don't want to say random, they're actually a pretty big paper, but why is that? Why couldn't we have more citizen journalists there? And that's one of the things I would like to see happen in future elections, especially on the local level, especially here in New Orleans. Is more and more citizens getting involved, and I really expected that they would, and I guess I'm part of the problem here, admittedly. I wasn't down there tweeting this either. But there needs to be greater local access to this information, and that's going to be a social media effort. We can't really trust the mainstream media by itself to do it, and this election really highlights that. This is a complicated, thorny issue that, frankly, mainstream media is very distracted on. They have all these other elections they're talking about. Even the local media here in New Orleans isn't paying significant attention to this one very, in my opinion, very major referendum. So that's what I've been thinking about in all this. It isn't so much about the election itself, but about it as an opportunity to perhaps motivate myself and others to get more involved, not just as voters, not just being politically aware, but as actual reporters. And that's something that I want to take from this. So that's all I really wanted to say about this. I'll probably touch base in months from now whenever we get the final results. But until then, this is Jonathan Bailey, signing off.